There is a part of you that you've been running from your entire life. A collection of impulses, desires, emotions, and truths that you've deemed unacceptable, shameful, dangerous. You didn't consciously decide to exile these parts. The decision was made for you early, through 1,000 small moments when you learned what was acceptable and what had to be hidden. When your anger made someone uncomfortable, so you learned to suppress it. When your ambition threatened someone, so you learned to diminish it. When your needs seemed too much, so you learned to deny them. And piece by piece, you constructed a self that could be loved, accepted, approved of, while locking away everything else in what Carl Jung called the shadow. But here's what Jung understood that most people never learn. The things you hide don't disappear. They don't fade away in the darkness. They grow stronger, more insistent, more controlling. They leak out in ways you don't recognize, in your unexplained anxiety, your sudden outbursts, your self-sabotaging patterns, your inexplicable attraction to the wrong people, your repetitive relationship dynamics that you swear you'll never repeat but always do. The shadow doesn't stay contained. It runs your life from the basement while you pretend to be in control upstairs. We live in a culture obsessed with positivity, with being your best self, with manifesting and optimizing and improving. We're told to focus on the light, to cultivate gratitude, to think positive thoughts. But Jung would have seen this as dangerous spiritual bypassing, the attempt to transcend darkness without first integrating it. Because you can't heal what you won't acknowledge. You can't transform what you keep hidden. You can't become whole by pretending half of yourself doesn't exist. The shadow demands recognition, and if you won't give it consciousness, it will take control unconsciously. This is where our exploration begins, in the uncomfortable territory between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. Between the persona you've constructed to earn acceptance and the raw, messy, complicated self you've hidden away. Between the spiritual bypassing that passes for growth in modern culture and the real psychological work that Jung understood was necessary for genuine transformation. Because integration isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. And wholeness requires facing what you've spent your life avoiding. Think about the patterns in your life that keep repeating despite your best intentions. The relationships that start differently but end the same way. The goals you set but never quite achieve. The boundaries you know you should set but can't maintain. The anger that surprises you with its intensity. The sadness that wells up for no apparent reason. The fear that keeps you small even when you consciously want to expand. These aren't random occurrences, they're your shadow speaking. They're the parts of you that you've denied demanding attention the only way they know how. Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon, watching how the unconscious expresses itself when ignored. He saw that the things we most condemn in others are often the things we can't acknowledge in ourselves. The person who rails against dishonesty might be avoiding their own capacity for deception. The one who judges others' neediness might be denying their own desperate need for connection. The one who criticizes others' anger might be sitting on a volcano of rage they've never allowed themselves to feel. We project onto others what we can't accept in ourselves, and in doing so, we stay blind to our own shadow. But projection isn't the only way the shadow operates. It also sabotages. It creates the inexplicable resistance when you're about to succeed. It generates the anxiety attack right before an opportunity. It makes you pick fights when things are going well. It pushes away the people who actually love you and attracts the ones who'll hurt you. Not because you're fundamentally broken, but because the shadow contains all the beliefs and emotions you've exiled, and those exiled parts will do anything to be seen, even if it means destroying what your conscious self claims to want. This is what makes Jung's work so crucial and so difficult. He's not offering you a technique to feel better or a strategy to manifest your desires. He's telling you that you're living a fraction of your actual life, that you're being controlled by parts of yourself you won't acknowledge, that you'll keep repeating the same patterns until you turn toward what you've been avoiding. And turning toward the shadow is terrifying because it means confronting everything you've deemed unacceptable about yourself. What if you looked honestly at your capacity for cruelty, for manipulation, for selfishness? What if you acknowledged the parts of you that are jealous, vindictive, petty? What if you admitted to desires you've been taught are shameful, for power, for recognition, for pleasure without purpose? What if you felt the rage you've been suppressing since childhood, the grief you've never let yourself fully experience, the fear you've been pretending doesn't exist? Most people would rather die than face these truths. And in a sense, they do. They die psychologically, living only a narrow band of experience while the rest of life remains locked away. Jung called the process of integrating the shadow individuation, becoming whole, becoming fully yourself. But this isn't the self-help version of becoming your best self. It's darker, messier, more dangerous. It's descending into your own underworld and reclaiming what you've abandoned there. It's acknowledging that you contain capacities for both creation and destruction, for both love and hatred, for both generosity and selfishness. It's accepting that you're not just light pretending darkness doesn't exist. You're the full spectrum, and wholeness requires embracing all of it. The modern world makes this work harder because we've lost the cultural containers for shadow work. Ancient cultures had rituals, myths, practices designed to help people confront and integrate their darkness. Vision quests, initiations, ceremonies that forced you to face what you'd been avoiding. Modern therapy can serve this function if done well, but too often it becomes another way to construct a more acceptable persona rather than dismantling the persona to discover what's underneath. And social media has made shadow work nearly impossible for many people because it's created a culture of constant performance. You're not just hiding your shadow from yourself, you're performing the absence of shadow for an audience. You're curating a version of yourself that's all light, all growth, all positivity. You're turning your life into content, and content can't be messy or dark or honestly struggling. So the gap between who you are and who you perform widens, and the shadow grows more powerful in proportion to how much you deny it. But the cost of this denial is your life. Not metaphorically, literally, because every moment you spend maintaining the persona, managing the projection, keeping the shadow contained, is a moment you're not actually living. You're performing, defending, controlling, managing. You're exhausted from the effort of holding yourself together, of keeping certain thoughts and feelings at bay, of being the person you think you need to be rather than discovering who you actually are underneath all that conditioning. Jung saw that most people go through life asleep, identified with their persona, controlled by their shadow, never questioning whether the self they think they are is actually real. And then something happens, a crisis, a loss, a breakdown, a moment when the structure they've built can no longer hold. And in that collapse is the opportunity for real transformation. Not improvement, not optimization, not becoming a better version of the same persona, but genuine psychological death and rebirth. The death of who you thought you were and the birth of who you actually are when you stop hiding from yourself. This is where our work begins. Not in making you better at managing your shadow, but in helping you turn toward it, acknowledge it, integrate it. Because you can't heal what you hide. You can't transform what you won't acknowledge. You can't become whole by pretending half of yourself doesn't exist. The shadow will either be brought into consciousness where it can be integrated, or it will control you from the unconscious where you can't see it operating. Those are the only options Jung offered, integration or possession. And most people choose possession without realizing they're choosing at all. So what exactly is hidden in your shadow? The answer is unique to each person, shaped by your particular history, your family dynamics, your cultural conditioning. But there are patterns, commonalities in what gets exiled. Usually, it starts with emotions that were deemed unacceptable when you were young. Maybe anger wasn't allowed in your family, so you learn to suppress it until you barely know it's there except when it explodes unexpectedly. Maybe sadness made people uncomfortable, so you learn to smile through pain until you lost access to your own grief. Maybe fear was seen as weakness, so you learned to push through everything until anxiety became your baseline state. But it's not just emotions that end up in the shadow. It's also desires and impulses that didn't fit the image of who you were supposed to be. If you grew up in a family that valued being selfless, your healthy selfishness got exiled. If you grew up in a culture that shamed sexuality, your desires became shadowy and often got expressed in distorted ways. If you were taught that wanting recognition or power was wrong, those ambitions went underground where they could operate without your awareness, sabotaging you precisely when you got close to achieving them. Jung understood that the shadow isn't just negative material. It also contains positive qualities that you've been taught are unacceptable. The sensitive child in a tough family learns to hide their tenderness and it becomes shadow material. The naturally assertive child in a conflict-avoidant family learns to suppress their strength. The creative, expressive child in a rigid, conventional family learns to dim their light. So the shadow contains not just the darkness you've denied, but also the brightness you've been taught to hide. This is why shadow work is so disorienting. You expect to find only darkness, only the parts of yourself you're ashamed of. But you also find power, creativity, vitality, strength, all the parts you suppressed because they threatened someone else, or didn't fit the narrow role you were assigned, or were too much for the people around you to handle. The shadow is everything authentic about you that you learn to hide to survive and be accepted. And reclaiming it means you have to question everything you thought you knew about yourself. The process of discovering your shadow usually begins with noticing your projections. Who do you judge most harshly? What qualities in others trigger intense reactions in you? The person who irritates you with their attention-seeking might be denying their own need to be seen. The one who judges others as weak might be avoiding their own vulnerability. The one who despises manipulative people might be blind to their own subtle ways of controlling. Jung's axiom was simple: if it triggers you, it's yours. The intensity of your reaction is proportional to how much you've denied that quality in yourself. But projection alone doesn't reveal the full shadow. You also have to look at your patterns of self-sabotage. What do you keep saying you want but never quite achieve? Where do you stop yourself right before success? What do you sabotage just when things start going well? These aren't random failures of willpower, they're shadow at work. Some part of you that holds a belief or fear or desire that contradicts what your conscious self claims to want. And until you bring that part into awareness, it will keep undermining you from the unconscious. Nietzsche understood this from a different angle when he wrote about resentment, the way suppressed emotions poisonous from within. He saw that the person who can't express their natural anger and assertiveness doesn't become peaceful. They become resentful, passive-aggressive, subtly cruel in ways they don't even recognize. The emotion denied doesn't disappear. It ferments, becomes toxic, expresses itself sideways in ways that are often more destructive than if it had been acknowledged and expressed cleanly in the first place. This is where most people get stuck in their personal growth. They work on positive thinking, on setting goals, on creating vision boards and affirmations. But underneath all that conscious intention sits the shadow, the parts that believe they don't deserve success, that fear visibility, that are comfortable with struggle because struggle is familiar. And no amount of positive thinking can overcome the shadow because the shadow doesn't respond to conscious will. It responds to acknowledgement, to being seen, to being integrated rather than transcended. Jung saw this play out repeatedly in his patients. Successful people who kept sabotaging their careers at the moment of greatest success. People who claimed they wanted love but kept choosing partners who couldn't give it. People who said they wanted to heal but kept engaging in the very behaviors that kept them sick. The conscious self says one thing, but the shadow runs the show. And the shadow will keep running the show until you turn toward it with genuine willingness to see what's actually there. This turning toward is what makes shadow work genuinely difficult. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's not about understanding your shadow conceptually. It's about feeling what you've spent your life not feeling. It's about acknowledging desires you've deemed shameful. It's about admitting to capacities within yourself that you've always condemned in others. It's about looking honestly at how you've hurt people, how you've been selfish, how you've manipulated, how you've lied to yourself and others. And doing this without immediately jumping to fix it or transcend it or make it okay. Most people can't tolerate this. The moment they glimpse their shadow, they either recoil in horror and shove it back down, or they immediately try to transform it into something acceptable. But Jung insisted that the shadow first needs to be witnessed, acknowledged, felt. Not fixed, not transcended, just seen, because the shadow isn't evil, it's exiled. And what's exiled doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be welcomed back, integrated, given a place at the table of your consciousness. This is where the descent gets darkest. Because as you start to acknowledge your shadow, you realize how much of your life has been a defense against it. Your relationships, your career choices, your personality itself, so much of it has been constructed to keep the shadow at bay. You've been living in service to the persona, the acceptable self, while the real self languishes in darkness. And that realization brings grief. Deep, heavy grief for all the years spent living as half a person, for all the vitality locked away, for all the energy wasted in suppression. But there's also something else in that grief, the first stirrings of liberation. Because once you see clearly what you've been doing, you gain the possibility of choosing differently. Once you recognize the shadow operating, it starts to lose its unconscious power over you. Not immediately, not completely, but incrementally. You catch yourself projecting and can pull it back. You notice yourself about to sabotage and can pause. You feel an intense reaction and can ask what it's showing you about yourself rather than making it about the other person. This is where Jung's concept of integration becomes practical. Integration doesn't mean acting on every shadow impulse. It doesn't mean expressing every exiled emotion without filter. It means bringing the shadow into consciousness where you can work with it, understand it, channel it constructively. The person who integrates their shadow anger doesn't become violent. They become capable of healthy assertion and boundary setting. The person who integrates their shadow desire for power doesn't become tyrannical. They become capable of taking up space and owning their authority. Integration transforms shadow material from unconscious compulsion into conscious choice. The quality doesn't disappear. Anger doesn't become peace. Desire doesn't become absence of wanting. But it moves from controlling you unconsciously to being available to you consciously. You can feel your anger and choose how to express it. You can acknowledge your desire and decide whether to act on it. You're no longer possessed by what you've denied. You possess it, in the sense of having access to the full range of human experience rather than just the narrow band you've deemed acceptable. Jung's actual teaching can be stated simply but lived only with difficulty. What you don't make conscious will run your life, and you'll call it fate. Every repetitive pattern, every inexplicable attraction, every self-defeating behavior, these aren't random occurrences or evidence that you're broken. They're the shadow seeking recognition the only way it knows how. And the work of individuation, of becoming whole, requires you to stop running from these patterns and start investigating what they're trying to show you. The practical method Jung developed was active imagination, a way of engaging directly with shadow material through dialogue, visualization, creative expression. You don't just think about your shadow intellectually. You personify it, give it form, ask it questions, listen to what it has to say. This sounds strange to modern ears trained in rational analysis, but Jung understood that the unconscious speaks in images and symbols, not logical arguments. You can't think your way to shadow integration. You have to engage it on its own terms. This might look like dialoguing and writing with the part of you that sabotages. Asking it directly, what do you want? What are you protecting me from? What do you fear would happen if I succeeded? And then listening, really listening, without immediately arguing with whatever emerges. Because the shadow usually has reasons, even if they're outdated. The part that keeps you small might have learned early that visibility meant danger. The part that pushes people away might believe that closeness leads inevitably to abandonment. These aren't rational beliefs, but they're deeply held, and they won't release just because your conscious mind knows better. Or it might look like paying attention to your dreams, which Jung saw as the primary way the unconscious communicates. The recurring nightmares, the anxiety dreams, the dreams of being chased or attacked, these aren't random neural firings. They're imagistic representations of shadow material demanding attention. The pursuer in your dream might represent the parts of yourself you're running from. The monster might symbolize emotions or desires you've deemed monstrous. Learning to engage these dreams, to ask what they're showing you, opens a direct line to shadow material that your waking consciousness keeps at bay. The application of Jung's method extends into every area of life because the shadow operates everywhere. In relationships, your shadow often appears through your choice of partner. You're not randomly attracted to certain people. You're unconsciously drawn to those who either carry your shadow for you or trigger it in you. The person who attracts partners who are emotionally unavailable might be avoiding their own fear of intimacy. The one who keeps choosing narcissistic partners might be denying their own need for recognition. The patterns repeat not because you have bad judgment, but because the shadow is trying to heal itself through relationship. In work, the shadow appears in what you can't allow yourself to do. The entrepreneur who can't charge what they're worth is dealing with shadow beliefs about deserving or worthiness. The employee who can't speak up in meetings has shadow material around assertion or being seen. The creative who can't finish projects has shadow resistance to completion, usually because completion means judgment or visibility. These aren't just practical problems to solve with better strategies. They're invitations to investigate what's hidden underneath the surface behavior. In your relationship with yourself, the shadow appears in your inner critic, in the harsh voice that's never satisfied, that constantly judges and finds you lacking. Most people try to combat this voice with positive affirmations or self-compassion practices. But Jung would say first you need to investigate whose voice this actually is, what it's protecting you from, what it believes would happen if you actually accepted yourself. Often the inner critic is a defense against the deeper fear that if you stopped being harsh with yourself, you'd become completely unacceptable. The critic is trying to keep you in line, to make you better, because some part of you learned early that as you are is not enough. But here's where Jung's work becomes genuinely radical. He's not asking you to fix these patterns or transform them into something more acceptable. He's asking you first to see them, to acknowledge them, to understand that they've been running your life. Because the attempt to fix before understanding is just another form of denial. It's shadow work that's still in service to the persona, trying to become an even more perfect version of yourself rather than accepting that wholeness includes imperfection, darkness, the full catastrophe of being human. The ethical dimension of shadow work is crucial but often misunderstood. Some people hear about integrating the shadow and think it means acting on every impulse, expressing every emotion without filter, indulging every dark desire. But integration isn't about acting out. It's about bringing shadow material into consciousness where you can work with it responsibly. The person who integrates their shadow capacity for cruelty doesn't become cruel. They become aware of how cruelty operates in themselves and can therefore choose differently. They see the impulse but don't have to act on it. This is where Jung's work intersects with genuine moral development. The person who hasn't integrated their shadow isn't more moral for suppressing their dark impulses. They're just unconscious of them. And unconscious morality is fragile, easily overridden when the right circumstances trigger shadow material. The person who's done shadow work and integrated their capacity for darkness is actually more reliably ethical because they've faced their dark impulses, understood them, and made conscious choices about how to live. Their morality isn't based on denial but on integration. The historical examples of shadow possession are everywhere, from personal relationships to collective movements. The spiritual teacher who preaches love and compassion but has hidden sexual misconduct, that's unintegrated shadow erupting. The social justice activist who becomes viciously cruel to anyone who disagrees, that's shadow aggression justified by moral righteousness. The person who prides themselves on being nice but undermines others through passive aggression, that's shadow hostility expressing itself unconsciously. The shadow doesn't care about your conscious values. If you don't integrate it, it will express itself in ways that directly contradict everything you claim to stand for. Jung saw this pattern at the collective level too. He watched how Nazi Germany emerged from a culture that had disowned its aggressive shadow, projecting it onto Jews and other scapegoats. He understood that collective shadow work is as necessary as individual work, that societies need to acknowledge their capacity for evil rather than projecting it onto enemies. The country that sees itself as purely good and its enemies as purely evil is possessed by shadow at the collective level. The same mechanism operates whether individual or collective. What you don't make conscious gets acted out. The transformation that comes from shadow work isn't becoming a better person in the sense of being more acceptable or admirable. It's becoming a whole person in the sense of having access to the full range of human capacities. You don't become only light. You become someone who contains both light and darkness and can consciously work with both. You're not trying to transcend your humanity. You're finally inhabiting it fully, without the exhausting effort of keeping half of yourself locked away. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not self-improvement but self-realization. Not becoming who you should be but discovering who you actually are beneath all the conditioning, all the defenses, all the persona construction. And that discovery requires you to face what you've been taught is unacceptable, to acknowledge capacities you've denied, to feel emotions you've suppressed, to admit to desires you've deemed shameful. It requires psychological courage that most people never develop because our culture doesn't value it or teach it. So where does this leave you, standing at the threshold of your own shadow? You've seen how much of your life has been controlled by parts of yourself you won't acknowledge. You've recognized the patterns, the projections, the self-sabotage. You've felt the exhaustion of maintaining a persona while the real self languishes in darkness. Now comes the hardest part, actually doing the work of turning toward what you've been avoiding, bringing the shadow into consciousness, integrating what you've exiled. This isn't comfortable work. It's not Instagram-ready shadow work that you can turn into inspirational content. It's messy, dark, humbling, and absolutely necessary if you want to stop being controlled by what you won't acknowledge. The first practical step is developing the capacity to observe yourself without immediately judging. This is harder than it sounds because we're trained to constantly evaluate ourselves as good or bad, acceptable or unacceptable. But shadow work requires a different stance, witnessing. You need to be able to notice your jealousy without immediately condemning yourself for it. To feel your rage without making it wrong. To acknowledge your manipulative impulses without spiraling into shame. This witnessing stance creates space between you and your shadow material, allowing you to see it clearly rather than being possessed by it or repressing it. Start small. Notice when you have an outsized reaction to something. Someone cuts you off in traffic and you're filled with rage that seems disproportionate to the event. That's shadow material. Don't just dismiss it as road rage or having a bad day. Ask yourself, what am I actually angry about? What does this trigger in me? Often you'll find that the surface trigger connects to something deeper, feeling disrespected, feeling invisible, feeling like you don't matter. The traffic incident just activated shadow material that's always there, usually unconscious. Or notice when you judge someone harshly. You see someone being attention-seeking and you feel contempt. That contempt is a sign. It's showing you something in yourself that you've disowned. Maybe you learned early that wanting attention was shameful, so you suppressed that need. Now when you see it in others, you react strongly because it triggers the part of you that still wants to be seen but has learned to hide that desire. The person isn't actually doing anything to you. They're just reflecting back something you can't accept in yourself. This kind of investigation requires honesty that most people aren't willing to bring. It's humbling to realize how much you project. It's uncomfortable to acknowledge impulses and desires you've deemed unacceptable. It's painful to see how you've hurt people through your unconscious shadow material. But this honesty is the prerequisite for integration. You can't integrate what you won't acknowledge. And you can't acknowledge what you're constantly defending against with denial, rationalization, and spiritual bypassing. Jung understood that this work often requires support, a therapist, a trusted friend, someone who can hold space for your shadow material without judgment and without trying to fix it. Because doing shadow work alone is difficult. Your defenses are strong, and they're designed to keep shadow material unconscious. Having someone who can reflect back what you're not seeing, who can call you on your patterns gently but firmly, who can sit with your darkness without being disturbed by it. This support makes integration possible in ways that solo work often can't achieve. But support or not, the core work is yours. It's sitting with the discomfort of feeling what you've avoided feeling. It's acknowledging desires you've deemed wrong. It's facing your capacity for cruelty, for selfishness, for manipulation. It's looking honestly at how you've contributed to your own suffering through patterns you've kept unconscious. This isn't about blame or shame. It's about taking full responsibility for your psychology, including the parts you didn't know were operating. As you do this work, something remarkable happens. The energy you've been using to keep the shadow suppressed becomes available for actual living. You're no longer exhausted from the constant effort of maintaining the persona. You're no longer triggered so easily because you've integrated what used to trigger you. You're no longer projecting as much because you've reclaimed your projections. You become more present, more real, more capable of genuine connection because you're no longer defending against half of your own experience. The relationships in your life often shift dramatically during shadow work. Some relationships end because they were based on mutual projection or on you playing a role that required you to keep your shadow suppressed. People who needed you to be only light, only positive, only helpful, they might not be able to handle you becoming more whole. And that's okay. Those relationships weren't serving your individuation anyway. They were keeping you stuck in a narrow version of yourself. Other relationships deepen in ways you didn't know were possible. Because when you stop hiding your shadow, when you can acknowledge your full humanity including the dark parts, you give others permission to do the same. You create space for real intimacy rather than the pseudo-intimacy of two personas performing for each other. You can be messy, contradictory, complicated, and still worthy of love. And in that permission you give yourself, you extend the same to others. Your relationship with yourself transforms most dramatically. The harsh inner critic often softens because you understand now that it was trying to protect you in its own misguided way. The self-judgment lessens because you're not trying to be only acceptable parts anymore. You're working with the full range of who you are. The shame diminishes because you've seen that your shadow material is human, universal, not evidence that you're uniquely flawed but proof that you're fully human. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, love of fate, takes on new meaning through shadow work. Because when you've integrated your shadow, you can look at your whole life, including the parts you're not proud of, and accept it as necessary for becoming who you are. The mistakes, the patterns, the ways you've hurt yourself and others, these aren't things to transcend or wish away. They're part of your individuation process. They're what your shadow used to try to get your attention. And now that you've learned what they were trying to teach, they lose their compulsive power. The practical outcome of shadow work isn't that you become perfect or that all your problems dissolve. It's that you become whole. You have access to the full range of human experience, both light and dark. You can be angry when anger is appropriate, vulnerable when vulnerability serves connection, assertive when boundaries need defending, tender when tenderness is called for. You're not stuck in one narrow range of acceptable emotion and behavior. You're fluid, responsive, alive in ways that weren't possible when half of yourself was locked in the basement. And perhaps most importantly, you stop expecting yourself to be only one thing. You recognize that you contain multitudes, contradictions, complexities. You're neither purely good nor purely bad. You're not on a journey to become perfect. You're on a journey to become real. And real means accepting that you have the capacity for both creation and destruction, for both love and hatred, for both generosity and selfishness. Shadow work doesn't make you a saint. It makes you a complete human being who can work consciously with the full range of their humanity. Jung's warning that you can't heal what you hide becomes a truth you've lived into. You've seen how hiding your shadow kept you stuck, kept you repeating the same patterns, kept you from genuine intimacy and full aliveness. And you've experienced the liberation that comes from finally turning toward what you've been avoiding. Not fixing it, not transcending it, but integrating it, bringing it into consciousness where it can be worked with rather than being worked by. The world needs people who've done this work. Not perfect people, but whole people. People who can acknowledge their darkness without being controlled by it. People who can see their projections and pull them back. People who can take responsibility for their shadow material rather than acting it out unconsciously on others. People who understand that moral development doesn't come from suppressing darkness but from integrating it consciously. This is the transformation Jung spent his life teaching about, not from unconscious to conscious only, but from fragmented to whole. From hiding half of yourself to integrating all of yourself. From being possessed by your shadow to possessing it in the sense of having conscious access to it. From living as a persona to living as a full self, contradictory and complex and fully human. If you're drawn to this kind of depth work, if you're tired of surface-level positivity and ready for the real psychological work of integration, subscribe to this channel. We're exploring the ideas that actually transform rather than just improve, the wisdom that makes you whole rather than just better. Because the work of facing your shadow, of integrating what you've hidden, of becoming fully yourself, this is the work that changes everything. And it's work that never truly ends because life keeps revealing new layers, new depths, new shadow material to integrate. But each layer integrated is freedom gained, vitality reclaimed, life more fully lived.